School is supposed to be the one place where teenagers feel safe, a place to learn, laugh, and build a future. But for a handful of deeply troubled teens, those same hallways became hunting grounds for revenge. These aren't stories meant to excuse what they did. They're stories about warning signs, calculated violence, and choices that destroyed countless lives. Every one of these teenagers believed revenge would set them free. Instead, it led them straight to prison. And our first case begins in Alaska. Evan Ramsey. Long before he walked into his high school carrying a shotgun beneath his winter jacket, Evan Ramsey's life had already been shaped by chaos. His father went to prison after an armed hostage standoff. His mother lost custody because of alcoholism, and Evan spent years moving through foster homes where investigators later documented severe physical and sexual abuse. By the time he reached Bethel Regional High School, classmates mocked him relentlessly, while resentment toward student Josh Palacios and Principal Ron Edwards continued to grow. But here's what made the tragedy even darker. Ramsey didn't hide his intentions. More than 15 students later admitted he had openly talked about bringing a gun to school, while 2 acquaintances encouraged him and even showed him how to use the shotgun. On February 19, 1997, he shot Palacios, murdered Principal Edwards, wounded 2 others, then surrendered after firing toward responding officers, shouting that he didn't want to die. Tried as an adult, he received an effective sentence keeping him imprisoned until at least 2066. Even behind bars, a violent assault on another inmate landed him in solitary confinement. Eric Hainstock. Eric Hainstock's home life was marked by abuse, instability, and depression, while school offered little relief. He complained of relentless bullying and growing anger towards staff after repeated disciplinary actions, including suspensions that he blamed on Principal John Klang. Days before homecoming, classmates later recalled hearing Eric threaten that the principal would not survive the event. On the morning of September 29, 2006, he entered Weston High School carrying his father's shotgun and a revolver. A custodian wrestled away the shotgun, but Eric immediately drew the handgun. Principal Klang rushed toward him, trying to stop the attack, and was fatally shot while restraining the teenager. Eric was arrested moments later, tried as an adult, convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, and sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility, beginning in 2037. Wayne Lowe. Wayne Lowe was a gifted violinist, but he also became increasingly isolated after alienating classmates with provocative and offensive views. As his resentment deepened, warning signs began piling up. School employees intercepted a shipment containing hundreds of rounds of ammunition addressed to him, yet the package was ultimately handed over. Later that same day, another student warned administrators that Lowe was armed and threatening violence, but no campus lockdown followed. That night, Lowe legally purchased an SKS rifle, armed himself, and began firing across the Simons Rock campus. He wounded receptionist Teresa Beavers, murdered Professor Nauko Wesa and student Galen Gibson, then fired into the library, injuring several others before calmly surrendering to police. His defense argued he suffered from severe mental illness, but the jury rejected the insanity claim and convicted him on every charge, resulting in consecutive life sentences. After changes in Massachusetts law, he became eligible for resentencing, but voluntarily declined, saying his punishment was fair. Alex Hreball. Alex Hreball rarely stood out at Franklin Regional High School. Quiet, withdrawn, and increasingly isolated, he spent much of his time buried online, obsessively studying infamous school attacks, especially Columbine. Investigators later found a manifesto titled Ragnarok, where he fantasized about slaughtering classmates and even planned to strike on a date connected to the Columbine shooters before changing it when school wasn't in session. And then, everything changed. On the morning of April 9, 2014, Hreball slipped 2 large kitchen knives into his pockets and blended into the crowded hallway before first period. Without warning, he began stabbing students as panic spread through the building. Then he pulled the fire alarm, hoping even more students would flood into the corridor. In just minutes, he wounded 20 students and 1 security guard before Assistant Principal Sam King and student Ian Griffith tackled him to the floor. Even while restrained, he reportedly declared, "My work is not done. I have more people to kill." Tried as an adult, Reibel later pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 23.5 to 60 years in prison. John Jason McLaughlin. For freshman John Jason McLaughlin, years of humiliation over severe acne slowly turned into obsession. Classmates taunted him with cruel nicknames, especially one student he blamed for constant bullying. Instead of asking for help, McLaughlin poured his anger into journals, writing about revenge while secretly planning an attack that would end inside his own school. Nobody around him realized those pages were becoming a blueprint for murder. On September 24, 2003, he stole his father's loaded .22 caliber pistol, prepared it inside a school bathroom, and waited for his intended target, Seth Bartell. The first shot struck Bartell, but another bullet ricocheted into senior Aaron Rollins, an innocent student who had nothing to do with the bullying and later died. McLaughlin chased the wounded Bartell into the gym before firing again. When teacher Mark Johnson confronted him and firmly shouted no, the teenager suddenly surrendered, unloading the weapon instead of firing again. His confession journals and careful planning became key evidence at trial. Convicted of first-degree and second-degree murder, McLaughlin received life in prison with parole eligibility after decades. Charles Andy Williams. Charles Andy Williams struggled to fit in after moving to California, and classmates later described him as awkward, bullied, and increasingly fascinated with the Columbine massacre. He openly told friends he wanted to pull a Columbine, and even showed them the revolver he planned to use. But almost everyone dismissed the threats as attention-seeking. Looking back, those ignored warnings became some of the most haunting moments in the entire case. On March 5, 2001, Williams entered a boys' restroom at Santana High School with a stolen .22 caliber revolver before opening fire. He then walked into the crowded courtyard, shooting students and even wounding security supervisor Peter Ruiz as terrified teenagers fled in every direction. Police cornered him before he could continue, and he surrendered without another fight. During later evaluations, Williams claimed he never expected people to die and insisted he only thought he would make noise before police arrived, a statement prosecutors argued was completely contradicted by his planning and actions. Tried as an adult, he received a sentence of 50 years to life. Today, however, the case has entered a new legal battle after California courts approved resentencing proceedings that could dramatically change his future, though appeals continue and no final outcome has been reached. Caleb Sharp. By the time Caleb Sharp walked into Freeman High School, investigators would later say this attack had been building for months. He claimed years of bullying had pushed him toward revenge, but his notebooks painted a much darker picture. He had become fascinated with previous school shootings, filled journals with violent plans, and even wrote that a coin flip had convinced him to go through with it. Friends heard disturbing comments and tried warning adults, but the danger wasn't fully recognized until it was too late. Then everything unraveled in seconds. Sharp entered school carrying an AR-15 and a handgun, but the rifle jammed almost immediately. Classmate Sam Strain confronted him instead of running, sacrificing his own life, while others escaped. Sharp switched to a handgun, shooting several students before a school custodian confronted him and ended the attack. He later pleaded guilty to murder and other charges. Originally sentenced to 40 years to life, his sentence was overturned on appeal because of Washington's juvenile sentencing laws, and he was resentenced to 25 years to life. T.J. Lane. T.J. Lane's childhood was filled with instability, violence, and broken relationships, but classmates also described an ongoing rivalry that fueled his anger. Days before the shooting, he posted an ominous message on Facebook that many dismissed as teenage drama. On the morning of the attack, he wore a shirt later associated with the crime and walked into Chardon High School carrying a pistol. Nobody realized the warning signs were about to become reality. Lane opened fire inside the cafeteria, apparently intending to target one specific rival, but the bullets struck multiple students instead. As panic spread, football coach Frank Hall chased Lane from the building, helping stop even more bloodshed before police arrested him nearby. During court proceedings, Lane showed little remorse, even wearing a shirt with an offensive message and insulting victims' families before receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. In 2014, he briefly escaped prison with 2 other inmates but was captured within hours. Today, he remains imprisoned at the Ohio State Penitentiary. Jacob Davis. Jacob Davis seemed like the last student anyone would suspect. He was an honor student, but after becoming consumed by jealousy over his ex-girlfriend's new relationship, his grades and behavior began slipping. Instead of moving on, prosecutors said he carefully planned an ambush in the school parking lot. When the victim pleaded for his life, Davis ignored every chance to stop and carried out the shooting before calmly surrendering to police without resistance. During trial, the evidence showed the attack had been deliberate, leading to a life sentence. Years later, Davis expressed remorse for what he had done, but nothing could undo the lives destroyed by that single calculated decision. Every revenge story ended with shattered lives, lifelong grief, and prison forever.